as one of the 50 visionaries in social justice and community organizing. Please join me in welcoming the amazing Rinku Sen.
Hi, everybody. Can you all see me? I'm a tiny person, so podiums and I don't get along very well. I am so happy to be here. It's a huge honor to be introduced by Kim Gandhi, a woman with an enormous history and a great deal of leadership in social justice. And all of you look wonderful, although I can barely see you because of the lights, but I can feel your energy, your lovely energy. I wanted to start by telling you a quick story. This actually happened just at the turn of this century that I'm supposedly responsible for, along with all of you. It was New Year's Eve, 1999, or New Year's Eve going into 2000, coming into this century. And I was in Novato, California. I had spent a week at a friend's house sitting while she was away, and to be honest, I was nursing a big emotional hurt, and so I had spent a week kind of by myself, reflecting and getting in touch with myself and all of that. And at the end of the week, I decided I would go to a New Year's Eve party, and I needed to cook something to take with me to the party. And because I had been in this very open emotional state, when I went to the grocery store, I was still kind of raw, and I had decided I wanted to make a pot roast for this party. So I was in the meat section looking at the cuts of beef and looking for the right pot roast. And right next to me were two people. The city of Novato is a fairly white city in Northern California, more of a town, really, small city. And so I'm in this grocery store that is where the workers are of color, but the people shopping there are largely white. And I'm standing right next to two middle-aged white people, a woman and a man. They might have been 50, 55. And I was overhearing their conversation because I was standing right next to them. There was no barrier between us. And so I hear them beginning to talk about the union in that grocery store, which had just been decertified. And they were really upset about this, and they were complaining to each other about how all the workers would be abandoned now, and they wouldn't be able to protect themselves. And I was trained first as a community organizer and then as a reporter, and I think those have to be the two nosiest professions in the world. So, throughout my entire life, my adult life, I had been taught to just butt in and ask questions and get people to talk to me about things that are really not any of my business. And so I felt perfectly fine turning to these two people and saying, "Excuse me, I couldn't help overhearing your conversation, and I've worked with unions for a long time, and I just wondered which union was it that used to be in this grocery store and that now no longer is? What local was it? What union was it?" And neither one of them answered me, but the woman looked me right in my face, right in my eye, with a blank face herself, no affect, and she didn't answer my question, but she said instead, "Oh, but those blacks and immigrants now, they can just get all the welfare that they want." And my first reaction was shock. Did she really just say that to me? And my second reaction, horribly, was humiliation. I thought, oh, I shouldn't have butt into their conversation. This is what you get for poking your nose into places where you don't you're not belonging. And my third reaction was total rage. I just couldn't believe that this person who had with whom I felt such empathy, I felt so bad that this union had been gotten rid of in a place that she cared about. I was enraged that she had the impression that I was part of a group of people that was actually taking advantage of her. And it was a long time before I could feel any compassion for her. But eventually I did, because I realized that woman and I, we need to be in the same movement. We agree that unions are a good thing. We agree that people who work hard for their employer should not be abused by their employer, that they should be able to have some control over their workplace. We agree probably on a whole host of other things, but she had decided that I didn't belong in her community. If we have a circle around us, and inside the circle are people who are like us, and outside the circle are people who are not like us, I was not in her circle. And I wanted her to be in my circle, but she wasn't showing me that she wanted to be there. And she had decided that I was a person who didn't belong and who was taking advantage of her. And frankly, Ronald Reagan had convinced her of that while he started the process that eventually led to the decertification of that very union that she was now missing. The job of the media in this country is to explain me and that woman to each other. To explain us to each other so that the great irony that by the year 2000, none of us had the welfare that we needed, and by 2011, when we've just had the worst recession in 50 years, we don't have the safety net that we need, because Ronald Reagan convinced Americans that there was a person called the welfare queen who was black and who took all those welfare benefits and used it to buy herself fur coats and Cadillacs. Now, that means that the progressive media and that the progressive movement needs to be able to address race explicitly and straightforwardly and in a way that puts the entire analysis together. When we have liberal silence on racial questions, the only people talking to that lady who I met in the Safeway store are conservatives. And the way they define racism is that it's always individual, that it's always intentional, and that it's always obvious. And you know what? We passed laws in this country in the 1960s that are supposed to do away with that kind of racism. Therefore, it must no longer exist. Therefore, colorblindness must have been the solution to racial discrimination, and therefore we must be done with all of that. And so if you are a person who needs a safety net, then that must be your fault. That is how conservatives define the race debate today. And that is what helps them to convince Americans that the sky is really green and the sea is really a desert and healthcare reform is really evil. It isn't just about having a class analysis and economic analysis and analysis of the way in which our democracy is broken. All of those things have at their center the inclusion of people of color, the inclusion of racial justice as part of the broad social justice agenda. If we don't have that idea about what we're doing here, then Congress people are always going to be able to, with impunity, pull up an acronym that says the State Children's Health Insurance Program really stands for socialized Clinton-esque health care for illegals and their parents. That actually happened. That was a sign that Steve King held up in the halls of Congress. Now, I understand that many, many progressives of all colors do not want to enter into the race debate because they don't want to get into this dynamic where there are accusations of racism and then defense against racism. Nobody wants to have to trot out their list of Black and Latino and Asian friends as justification for being able to be in the room, or their white friends, going in the other direction. And we can avoid that. I understand why that's a problem, and that is a dynamic that emerges from the definition of racism as always being about the individual, always being intentional. We can avoid that if we change the question around race, change it from who is the racist to what is causing racial inequity. So we don't have to be about routing out the racist, because all of us have our biases. We have things in our heads. We grow up with them. They've been around for thousands of years, hundreds of years. And we don't have to stay in our heads only if we go about the project of making the world the kind of place we want it to be. A world where we don't have these enormous gaps in income, in housing, in education. A world in which we're together not just in the way we think about each other, but in the actual conditions of our lives. That is the world in which we're going to be able to come together and be a unified country. So if there is something that I would like you to take home from this conference, it is this idea that a racial analysis is key to everything that we're doing here, key to reforming the media, key to building an economy that really works, key to having an inclusive democracy in which every single person gets to have their voice. One of the things that I would ask you to do as part of that project is to drop the language of illegality in the immigration debate. There are tons of other words we can use to indicate the choices that people have made without stripping them of their humanity. I'm going to close with this idea. Taylor Branch, who was the biographer of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Taylor Branch wrote an op-ed on one of the anniversaries of King's assassination. And in that op-ed in the New York Times, Branch said that Dr. King thought that race was a part of everything, but not all of anything. And I really agree with that. Race is a part of everything, but of course it's not all of anything. Of course class plays a role. Of course gender is really important. Of course sexuality is going to change somebody's experience of the world. But if we can remember, if all of us can remember that race is a part of everything, then I promise that I will help to lead a movement in which we also are able to recognize that it's not all of anything, of everything. So we can have a racial analysis, and we can also be about economic justice and feminism and sexual liberation. There is no reason that we have to split those things apart, split ourselves apart. And if we can remember all of that, then we can transform the media, we can transform the interactions between union-loving white people and pot roast-buying people of color in grocery stores. And when we do that, we can transform our nation. Thank you so much.